There's a moment in every mob story where the dangerous men get all the attention. The guy who never blinks. The guy who walks into a room and everybody recalibrates. Jimmy Burke had that. Tommy DeSimone had it in spades. But tucked somewhere between those two, in every room they were ever in, there was another guy shifting his chair, asking why the glass was shaped wrong, explaining to a bartender that the acoustics were suboptimal for conversation. And somehow, impossibly, that guy was one of the most valuable people in the room for 15 straight years. His name was Ferdinand DeLucia. Everyone called him Freddy Noose. And on the morning of February 3rd, 1981, 4 FBI agents found him at a diner on Rockaway Boulevard in Ozone Park at 7:15 in the morning, working through his third plate of eggs. He'd arrived at 6:45. Changed tables twice before ordering, and had been talking continuously ever since to a man across from him who had long since given up responding and was now communicating exclusively with his coffee cup. When the agents came through the door with their badges out, Freddy looked up, registered what was happening, and his first reaction wasn't panic, it wasn't a flight. He looked down at his coffee cup and said, and I'm quoting directly from the arrest report here, "I knew it. The waitress has been refilling this wrong all morning." That was the tell. They handcuffed him while he was still mid-theory. He was still refining his argument about the coffee as they walked him through the door. One of those agents later told his supervisor it was the strangest collar of his career. The strangest part wasn't anything Freddy said. It was how completely he seemed to have been expecting this moment, like a man who had been waiting years for someone to finally arrive and confirm that he was right about something. That was Freddy. That's always been Freddy. And the real story isn't the arrest. The real story is everything that had to happen first 15 years of it before those agents pulled up outside that diner. South Ozone Park in the post-war decades was the kind of neighborhood built for men who came home dirty. It ran along Rockaway Boulevard and pressed up against Aqueduct Racetrack on one side and the expanding footprint of what was becoming JFK Airport on the other. Dense blocks, close neighbors, and a shared understanding that some fathers did things you didn't discuss over dinner. Ferdinand DeLucia arrived into this world around 1942, second son of a family that sold dry goods on 101st Avenue. His father was a steady man, his mother was a steady woman, and Ferdinand, from the beginning, was something neither of them had encountered before. He couldn't leave things alone. That was the core of it. A meal wasn't just a meal, it was a logistical problem waiting to be solved, starting with where the salt was positioned relative to everyone's reach. He handed his 6th grade teacher a rewritten version of her homework system with a note explaining the structural deficiencies in her original design. He once watched 2 neighborhood kids planning to steal a bicycle walk straight over and interrupted the whole operation to recommend a better getaway route. One of those kids later admitted the route was genuinely superior. Didn't matter, the moment was gone and so was the motivation. They just went home. The nose came at 14, and it came because of a card game on 102nd Avenue, grown men, small stakes, a Tuesday night. Freddy watched for 20 minutes, then walked over and told the man who was winning that he was fundamentally misreading the table and bleeding roughly 60 cents every hand as a result. That man, who had been in a fine mood until approximately 40 seconds ago, introduced Freddy's face to his knuckles. The nose healed crooked. The neighborhood had its name for him from that night forward. And the name went everywhere he went, including eventually into the most consequential criminal operation in that part of Queens. How does a kid like that end up in that world? Not through any single decision, not through one door opening at a dramatic moment. It happened incrementally the way everything happened in those neighborhoods, through proximity, through usefulness, through a reputation that built itself one conversation at a time. Around 1963, a numbers runner who collected on 101st Avenue made a pragmatic decision after the 3rd consecutive conversation with Freddy about the inefficiencies in his collection routing. He introduced Freddy to someone with more authority, not because he saw potential, but because it was the path of least resistance. A fourth conversation was simply not something he was prepared to have. That numbers runner, probably without realizing it, had just handed organized crime one of the stranger assets it would ever possess. By the mid-1960s, Freddy had become a known presence in the card rooms and social clubs around South Ozone Park. Not as muscle, not as anyone's explicit anything. Just as the man who saw angles that other people missed, who could make you want to throw something at him and still leave you with an idea worth thinking about. Most of the men in those rooms found him exhausting. But the men who actually made decisions had noticed something the others hadn't. The loudest voice in the room was occasionally catching things. The quiet ones walked right past. Jimmy Burke encountered Freddy for the first time in the autumn of 1967 at a card game on Lefferts Boulevard. Burke was running cargo operations out of the airport and had a margin problem. He couldn't locate money that should have been there, consistently wasn't, and nobody could explain where it was going. Freddy, who had been steered away from two separate conversations that same evening, spent 40 minutes in front of Burke laying out exactly where the leakage was happening and why. Burke didn't move, didn't smile, didn't interrupt. When Freddy finished, Burke turned to the man who'd brought him and said 4 words, "Keep that one around." "Not for the company," he said. For what's inside his head, that was the only endorsement Freddy Noose ever needed. By the early 1970s, Robert's Lounge on Lefferts Boulevard in South Ozone Park had become the nerve center of Burke's extended operation. And somewhere in that room, every night it mattered, was Freddy never at the main table, always somewhere just off to the side, at a seat he had repositioned at least once since arriving. If you want to understand what he actually contributed, you have to resist the easy version of the story, which is that he was the court jester. He was a specific instrument the operation had learned to play, and the comedy and the competence were two sides of the same thing. Spring of 1973, a cigarette truck job out of JFK needed a cooperative inside man, someone with access and enough debt to make the arrangement feel more like relief than coercion. Freddy identified the driver. An $11,000 gambling hole had the man looking for any exit that didn't involve broken things, and Freddy understood that particular psychology better than anyone. The job ran clean. 3 men in and out in 40 minutes, $47,000 net after the fence. Freddy took $4,000 as a finder's fee. And then, on the drive back from the job, while 2 men were still processing the federal crime they'd just committed, Freddy delivered a detailed analysis of why the tri-state cigarette distribution market was fundamentally underserved and why a coordinated 3-year strategy could transform it. One of those men later said, without a trace of humor, that he would have genuinely preferred the arrest. But here's the thing, the truck job was just money. What Freddy was actually worth came 3 months later, when he arrived at Robert's Lounge carrying a ledger that nobody had asked him to produce. His own reconstruction of the crew's loan sharking book, rebuilt from memory over 37 hours, he had found something. A miscalculation in how collection percentages were being applied. Not a random error, a systematic one that had been quietly bleeding the operation. $800 a week for 2 solid years. $83,000 gone, not stolen, not skimmed, just swallowed by arithmetic that nobody had ever thought to question because it had always been wrong the same way, and sameness reads as correctness. Burke took the ledger, studied it for maybe 30 seconds, said 2 words, "Fix it." Freddy, who had constructed a 45-minute presentation on the methodology and structural reforms required to prevent recurrence, said, "Yeah, okay," and had it corrected in 3 days. Because there are 2 words from Jimmy Burke that end every presentation before it starts. And Freddy, whatever else he was, understood that that was his real currency. Not the personality. What the personality was concealing. I want to stay in 1974 for a moment, because this is where Freddy's particular genius becomes inseparable from his particular blindness, and you need to see them together to understand what was coming. Slow night at Robert's Lounge. Burke at a table. Freddy had already moved his chair once. He leaned across with the expression of a man who has solved something important and said the word seafood. Burke looked at him without expression. Freddy laid out the entire architecture, the Fulton Fish Market, moving 40,000 pounds of Atlantic bluefin weekly, no meaningful monitoring past the first distribution transfer, restaurant-grade margins running 60% above wholesale, a contact at a Maspeth wholesaler carrying debt and ripe for a conversation, $180,000 in the first quarter alone if they establish 3 drop points between the market and the Midtown restaurant supply chain. Burke said, Freddy said, what about vending machines in airports? Burke put down his coffee. He didn't pursue the seafood operation. But 3 weeks later, he told Freddy he could place 3 vending machines in the Cruise laundromat on Jamaica Avenue in Woodhaven. 3 machines. Freddy received this as a mandate from a sovereign. By September of 1974, the units were installed at 481 Jamaica Avenue. They generated $12,000 in legitimate revenue across 6 months. The cash cover was clean, and Freddy was present 7 days a week, adjusting inventory, recalibrating pricing, conducting what could only be described as informal consumer research by explaining to everyone who came in to wash their clothes why the beverage selection had been engineered for peak late afternoon foot traffic. By February of 1975, an FBI field log noted a well-dressed man making daily visits to a Queens laundromat and conducting what appeared to be unspecified business. The visits stopped. Freddy lost the only legitimate enterprise he would ever run. He never quite recovered from losing it. The operation found a rhythm around Freddy, the way water finds a path around a fixed object. They'd been doing it long enough that they stopped noticing the accommodation. But something had happened to his internal warning system by the late 1970s that deserves to be taken seriously, even now, even knowing how it ended. He had developed what the crew called, mostly mockingly, the jukebox protocol. If Frank Sinatra played twice in a single evening at Robert's Lounge, Freddy relocated to the back booth. The sightlines at the main table were compromised. 3 times, he moved to a standing position near the hallway to the bathrooms. 4 times. And Freddy's considered position was that the establishment itself had been rendered unreliable for the night, at which point he would transfer his operation to a diner on Atlantic Avenue. The crew treated this system as ongoing entertainment, which was understandable. It sounded insane. Then came November 14th, 1977, a Tuesday. Sinatra at 9 o'clock, again at 10:30, again approaching midnight. By the time the clock hit 12, Freddy was on his feet near the hallway, pulling people by the sleeve and pointing out that the jukebox selection wasn't happening by chance, that the bartender had a cousin in the phone company, that the mirror placement above the bar created a direct line of sight to the card table, and that a car had been idling on Lefferts Boulevard for 6 minutes and needed to be acknowledged. The room was laughing. Somebody put Sinatra on a 4th time as a joke. Freddy picked up his jacket. 14 days later, court filings from a separate federal inquiry disclosed that a wiretap had been running since October on the business 2 doors down from Robert's Lounge. Not the lounge itself, a neighboring address, but the coverage extended across the full block and had captured 3 calls made from the public payphone on the corner. The very corner Freddy had mapped as a problematic surveillance point. He had the wrong building, he had the wrong mechanism, he had the right block and the right corner. The crew didn't stop finding that funny, but the laughter changed register. It became the kind of laughter that has something else underneath it. And that was the problem, because now Freddy Noose had a track record. Partial, inconsistent, wrong the majority of the time, but a track record. In a business where one overlooked signal is the difference between going home and going federal, even a 40% hit rate starts commanding a different kind of respect. The trouble was that the same qualities that made Freddy occasionally right made him structurally impossible to contain. The specific thing that brought him down arrived wearing a friendly face. Around 1978, Freddy had developed a genuine friendship with a man named Vincent, who ran a car service out of Richmond Hill. What made Vincent extraordinary in Freddy's world was simple. He never cut you off. He let you finish. For a man whose entire life had been an extended battle against people who stopped listening too early, a patient audience was practically sacred. Freddy talked to Vincent about his work with the ease of someone who had finally found a confessor. Never names, never specific jobs, but the mechanics, the architecture, how a loan sharking book actually worked, how clients were graded and managed, how the numbers were structured to sustain themselves. Enough detail that a trained investigator hearing those conversations would understand the operation from foundation to roof. Vincent had been quietly cooperating with a federal task force since the spring of 1977 on an unrelated matter. He was, it turned out, an excellent listener for professional reasons. When the pressure began building in the aftermath of the Lufthansa job, December 11th, 1978, $5,875,000 out of the JFK cargo terminal, the single largest cash robbery in American history. Freddy didn't get quieter, he got louder. The chair moved more. The jukebox protocol acquired a fifth tier he had previously considered excessive. In October of 1978, he spent 6 hours dismantling a stolen cigarette vending machine to its component screws, organized by dimension across the floor of a back room, then rebuilt it completely because he needed, as he put it, to understand the original engineering intent before he could assess whether it had been compromised. It was a cigarette machine in Queens. Nothing had been done to it. But Freddy needed the certainty. Around Robert's Lounge, men were disappearing. Not relocating, disappearing. The math following the Lufthansa job had reorganized itself overnight, and the results were not ambiguous. Freddy understood enough to know what the new arithmetic meant. What he couldn't do was what the moment required. He couldn't go quiet. October 16th, 1981, the FBI field office at 26 Federal Plaza in Lower Manhattan, a subpoena related to a loan sharking inquiry out of the Eastern District had brought Freddy in, not arrested, not charged, a voluntary interview. His attorney sat beside him, walked him through the advisements, and was explicit, say nothing. Fredco thanked him, warmly, sincerely, and then talked for 4 hours. He didn't give names. Whatever else unraveled in that room, his loyalty on that specific point held. But what he did give those agents, in terms that the investigator's notes described as enthusiastic and comprehensive, was a complete working blueprint of how a loan sharking operation functions, from the inside interest calculation methodology, the logic of client relationship management, how you distinguish between a borrower you carry and a borrower who requires a different kind of resolution, the full financial architecture of the enterprise. He drew diagrams with the government's pen on federal paper, detailed, labeled, annotated diagrams of his own operation, which he then walked through component by component while the agents across the table concentrated very hard on maintaining neutral expressions. One of those men told a colleague afterward that it was the single most educational morning of his federal career. That colleague understood immediately that this was not a compliment toward the justice system. The charges that materialized were modest by any measure: one count tied to the loan sharking inquiry, a $5,000 fine, probation. Freddy walked out of the federal courthouse on November 22nd, 1981. The first thing out of his mouth to the man on the steps was a structural critique of the courtroom's acoustic design and a concern about the judge's seating angle relative to the room's proportions. Those diagrams, however, had a longer life than the charges against him. 18 months later, they appeared as a supporting exhibit in a tax evasion case targeting a business connected to the cruise laundering structure. The linkage was indirect, the damage was contained, but a door that had taken 15 years to construct quietly closed, and Freddy had been the one holding the pen. Jimmy Burke went down in 1985 on a murder charge from the post-Lufthansa period and received a life sentence. He died inside Greenhaven Correctional Facility in April of 1996 at 64 years old. Henry Hill entered witness protection, cooperated extensively, and ultimately became, in one of organized crime's stranger endings, the most famous narrator of that entire world in American cultural life. In all his interviews, all his sessions with Pileggi, all the hours of testimony and recollection, he mentioned Ferdinand de Lucia exactly once, in a passage that never made the published book. His description: the guy who thought he was running the numbers when really the numbers were running him. There's affection in that, I think. And something harder too. Probably both are accurate. 481 Jamaica Avenue in Woodhaven is a regular laundromat today. A family runs it, no connection to anyone. The machines that Freddy installed, calibrated, and tended 7 days a week with the devotion of a man who believed he was building something lasting have long since been replaced. Nobody doing their laundry there today has any reason to know that a man in a suit once stood in that exact room explaining snack purchasing psychology to strangers, absolutely certain he was at the beginning of something significant. Here's what I can't let go of when I come back to this story. Freddy Noose existed in a world that was structurally incapable of accommodating what he actually was. He wasn't frightening enough for that environment. He wasn't silent enough for it. He wasn't connected enough to be insulated when everything collapsed. What he was, this specific, restless, relentless intelligence that couldn't look at a broken system without fixing it, and couldn't fix it without explaining the fix in exhausting detail. That thing had no legitimate home in organized crime. It just had utility. And utility without protection is a resource you use until it costs more than it earns. Put that exact brain somewhere else. Point it in a different direction at the right moment. It builds something real, something with a name on a door and people who come to work for it. But the first door that opened for Freddy was on 101st Avenue in South Ozone Park, held open by a numbers runner who was tired of being told his route was inefficient. That was the room, and the room, more than the man, determines everything that follows. Robert's Lounge is gone. That stretch of Lefferts Boulevard is unrecognizable from what it was. But if you know this story and you drive through South Ozone Park, something catches when you pass that address. You think about a man drawing operational diagrams on government paper while federal agents try not to react. You think about him standing near the bathroom at midnight, completely serious, explaining that the jukebox was a communications device. You think about the moment at the end of his last night in that room chair moved 1 inch to the left, looking up, saying the angle's still bad, and nobody arguing. They never argued, not in the end. In a room built entirely on fear and silence, the man who was neither of those things somehow turned out to be the one they couldn't replace. And not one of them ever fully figured out how that happened.